Palestine and Israel, the most contested real estate on Earth. Long before modern headlines, this narrow strip of land was the most contested real estate on Earth. It is smaller than the state of Maryland, yet for 3,000 years, it has outlived and outlasted the world's greatest empires. Why did a tiny coastal corridor become the ultimate collision point of human history? To understand the headlines of today, we have to peel back the layers of the forgotten past. To make sense of this landscape, we cannot view it as just an ancient religious war. Instead, the data reveals a multi-layered story of empires, shifting borders, and modern national movements. Think of this video as a clear roadmap through time. We will trace the structural journey from the early ancient kingdoms and the painful Roman exile, through centuries of Ottoman peace, into conflicting British promises during the World Wars, and finally to the unresolved modern borders we see today. By examining the primary facts rather than political opinions, we can unlock the true history behind this deeply important region. Our journey begins in the Bronze Age, thousands of years ago, when the world was ruled by the earliest superpowers. To understand why this land became so important, we have to look closely at its unique geography. On the map, this region, then known as Canaan, acted as a massive land bridge. It was the only narrow strip of solid ground connecting three giant continents: Africa, Europe, and Asia. If an ancient merchant wanted to trade goods, or if a king wanted to march his army to a neighboring continent, they had to pass through this exact corridor. Because of this strategic position, the land became the ultimate crossroads of the ancient world. Animated trade routes cut directly through its valleys, bustling with travelers carrying spices, metals, and textiles. But this great advantage also brought a major problem. Any empire that wanted to dominate and control the ancient world quickly realized they had to control Canaan first. It was the gateway to everywhere else. If you look to the south, the mighty Egyptian empire constantly pushed upward, wanting to protect its borders and expand its wealth. If you look to the east and north, massive empires like Assyria and Babylon were growing rapidly, hungry for more territory. Whenever these giant empires went to war, their battlefields were right here in this coastal corridor. It was not a choice made by the local people. It was the natural result of living on the most important trade highway on Earth. This original historical role grounded the region as a permanent collision point, setting a pattern of foreign intervention that would repeat for thousands of years to come. As the Bronze Age faded, a new era took shape on this vital land bridge. Over 3,000 years ago, the early Israelite tribes united to establish their own sovereign nations, known as the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. This historical moment marks the deep, foundational Jewish connection to the land, an identity rooted not just in ancient texts, but in the physical soil itself. If you look at modern archaeological digs across the region, the data is clear. Scientists have uncovered ancient Hebrew seals, everyday pottery, and unique structural blueprints that offer physical proof of these early societies. The undisputed centerpiece of this era was the city of Jerusalem. Under the rule of famous kings like David and Solomon, this hilltop citadel quickly transformed into the spiritual, political, and cultural beating heart of Judaism. It was here that the first Holy Temple was constructed, creating a central anchor for Jewish worship and national identity. Even after the kingdom later split into two separate entities, Israel in the north and Judah in the south, Jerusalem remained the ultimate symbol of unity for the Jewish people. It was more than just a capital city. It was the sacred space where their laws, language, and religious traditions became permanently tied to the geography. For centuries, through seasons of independence and waves of foreign pressure, this golden era established a historical root that would shape the identity of the region for millennia to come. This period of native rule was eventually shattered by the arrival of a massive new foreign superpower, the Roman Empire. The Romans took tight control of the region, but the local Jewish population refused to slip quietly into submission. They launched a series of major, brave revolts against the mighty Roman military, fighting fiercely for their independence. However, this resistance triggered a brutal and catastrophic crackdown from Rome. In the year 70 CE, Roman legions surrounded Jerusalem, leading to a fiery and devastating siege that ended with the complete destruction of the city and the burning of the Second Holy Temple. This tragic event acted as a violent catalyst that completely altered the regional status quo. Following the collapse of the rebellion, the Roman authorities initiated a policy of mass displacement, forcing hundreds of thousands of Jewish people into exile. This historic event marks the beginning of the Great Diaspora, a word that means dispersion, as Jewish communities were scattered across Europe, North Africa, and Asia, living as minorities in foreign lands for centuries. To make sure the local population could not easily rebuild their national identity, the Roman Emperor Hadrian made a deliberate political decision to relabel the geography itself. He officially wiped away the old names and renamed the entire province Syria-Palestina, drawing the name from the Philistines, an ancient coastal enemy of the Israelites. Through this symbolic move, Rome hoped to sever the historical and spiritual connection between the land and its original people, creating a brand new administrative reality that would shift the course of history once again. Over the next 1,000 years, the cultural landscape of this historic corridor experienced a major evolution. In the 7th century, Arab Islamic armies entered the region, bringing with them a new language, culture, and religion that gradually integrated with the existing local populations. Aside from a brief and violent period of European Christian control during the Crusades, the land remained under the continuous administration of various Islamic empires. Over these centuries, the people living there became predominantly Arab in speech and culture, practicing both Islam and Christianity. By the year 1517, a new superpower took control, the Turkish Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans would go on to govern the region for the next 400 years, bringing a long period of administrative stability. If you look at 16th-century Ottoman land registries and colorized illustrations of old Jerusalem markets, you can see a highly organized society. During this long peace, the territory was not a single, unified nation, but rather a collection of quiet administrative districts under the central rule of the Sultan. The demographic data from this multi-century era shows a very specific composition. An overwhelming Arab majority, made up of both Muslims and Christians, lived, farmed, and traded across the hills and valleys. Yet, the land also maintained a continuous, deeply rooted Jewish minority. These different groups lived side by side under a legal system that allowed religious minorities to manage their own local affairs. This stable, diverse social fabric remained the reality of the land for generations, creating a long-term status quo that many assumed would last forever. This long period of Ottoman stability came to a sudden end during the chaos of World War I. As the global conflict tore across continents, the Ottoman Empire collapsed, leaving a massive power vacuum in the region. Seizing this opportunity, the British military marched into the territory and took control. This shift marks the ultimate turning point of the 20th century, an era defined by a complicated style of British diplomacy that created deep and lasting contradictions on the ground. To understand how this crisis developed, we have to look closely at actual copies of original British diplomatic letters and documents. During the war, British officials made big, secret promises to different groups of people at the exact same time. On one hand, British officers wrote letters to local Arab leaders, encouraging them to revolt against the Ottomans. In exchange, Britain guaranteed these Arab communities that they would receive independent self-determination and control over their own lands once the war was won. But on the other hand, Britain was quietly working on a completely different plan. In November of 1917, the British government issued a public statement known as the Balfour Declaration. Crisp text scans of this document show that Britain officially endorsed the idea of establishing a national home for the Jewish people on that exact same soil. By trying to please everyone during a time of global war, the British Empire ended up issuing two completely conflicting guarantees for the future of a single piece of land. When the war finally ended and the League of Nations officially handed Britain the legal right to govern the territory under a system called the British Mandate, these overlapping, broken promises set two completely different groups of people on an inevitable collision course. During the 1920s and 1930s, the British Mandate quickly turned into a geopolitical pressure cooker. To visualize this tense era, imagine split-screen archival footage. On the left side, we see thousands of European Jews arriving at regional ports. They were fleeing intense, violent persecution in Europe and seeking safety in their ancestral homeland through the Zionist movement. On the right side of the screen, we see growing Palestinian nationalist political rallies, large protests, and escalating civil strikes. The local Arab population was deeply worried about losing their land, their jobs, and their dreams of independent self-determination. By looking through a balanced and non-biased lens, the economic and cultural data reveals why this friction grew so rapidly. The sudden, major demographic shifts placed a massive strain on the small region. As more Jewish families bought land and built new communities, the native Palestinian population felt increasingly threatened and pushed aside. This massive anxiety led to major outbreaks of communal violence, rioting, and eventually, a massive Arab revolt against British rule. As the years rolled on, both distinct national identities naturally collided. Each group had a powerful, valid reason to fight for their survival and future. The Jewish community was desperate for a secure haven from global anti-Semitism, while the Palestinian community was equally desperate to defend the homes they had lived in for generations. Trapped in the middle of these two competing national movements, the British Authority completely lost control of the territory. Realizing they could no longer manage the escalating chaos and violence, British leaders decided to abandon the mandate, leaving a deeply divided population to face an uncertain future. In 1947, the British government handed the entire problem over to the newly formed United Nations. The UN proposed a plan to partition, or divide, the land into two separate independent states, one Jewish and one Arab. An animated map transition reveals that while Jewish leaders accepted this division, Palestinian and neighboring Arab leaders rejected it, arguing that it unfairly split the land against the wishes of the majority population. When the British military officially packed up and left in May of 1948, Jewish leaders immediately declared the creation of the independent state of Israel. The very next day, a coalition of neighboring Arab nations launched an invasion, sparking the first full-scale Arab-Israeli war. To understand this watershed moment, we must apply a dual perspective, because this single war created two completely different historical memories. If we look at the map comparison, the final 1949 Armistice green lines show that Israel did not just defend its borders, it expanded its territory far beyond the original UN plan. For the Jewish population, this moment is remembered with great celebration as their war of independence. After centuries of wandering in the diaspora and surviving the horrors of the Holocaust in Europe, they had finally secured a sovereign, armed state to protect their people. But if we look through the other lens, the exact same period is remembered by Palestinians as the Nakba, an Arabic word that translates to the catastrophe. For them, the birth of Israel meant the profound trauma of losing their homeland. During the fighting, hundreds of native villages were completely depopulated, and more than 700,000 Palestinians were forced to flee or were driven from their homes, becoming permanent refugees. This division left a deep scar on the geography, creating a situation where one group's triumph became the foundational tragedy of the other. The layout of the region changed drastically once again in the summer of 1967. During a brief but intense conflict known as the Six-Day War, the Israeli military launched a series of strikes against mobilizing Arab armies and won a major victory. In just under a week, the map was completely redrawn. Israel captured the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan and the Gaza Strip from Egypt. This outcome established the modern administrative landscape we see today, placing millions of Palestinians under Israeli military rule. If we look at a highly accurate modern map, we can see how these specific borders created a deeply complicated network of checkpoints, walls, and blockades. Decades of subsequent uprisings, peace talks, and failed treaties have left the region stuck in a painful standstill. Today, the data shows that any future resolution is held back by four major structural roadblocks. The first roadblock is borders, as both sides struggle to agree on where a future Palestinian state should actually exist. The second is Jerusalem, a sacred city that both Israelis and Palestinians claim as their unique, rightful capital. The third roadblock is the continuous expansion of Israeli settlements, which are housing communities built inside the West Bank that break up Palestinian land. The final roadblock is the refugee crisis, involving millions of displaced Palestinians who still demand the right to return to their ancestral homes. History is not just a collection of dates. It is the blueprint of our present reality. Every single headline we read today is directly tied to the deep historical layers we have peeled back in this video. Which of these 8 historical eras do you believe had the single biggest impact on shaping the modern map? Let us know in the comments below, and subscribe to Primeval Studios for more deep dives into the stories that built our world.